listeners. This is the program of Economy and Politics, which is always organized by the media, the Dutch Oromo and the channel Oromia. And today we are going to discuss in English because we want to discuss on a special program which is very important to not only for the Oromos but for the other listeners to understand what is going on in this empire and what is the cause of the main problem and the fight and all the time the trouble which was rise in this country. And I have a guest today who is not new here, and he was here for several times, and he explained the different issues and different problems for the Oromo public. Today we are going to talk in English, and Danabo the Kaba, he's a human rights activist, Oromo human rights activist. You are welcome to this program today too to participate with me, and so you can greet our audience, and then we are going to talk about our topic today.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ayana, and greetings to our viewers and listeners too. Thank you for having me.
Okay. As our program today is in English, as I said, we often do in Afan Oromo. Today, the topic is Ethiopia is a prison of the Oromo people for over 150 years, and why Ethiopia became a prison for the Oromo people in general. And so we have to think what is actually why it became a prison. What are the main factors which explain this? The people in general in Ethiopia, particularly the Oromos, are living under prison. So this is what we are going to explain today. And when we take up this problem, we are going to take up especially the case of the Oromo prisoners, especially the leaders of the Oromo Liberation Front, which are now in the prisoner for many years without the court order and without any crime because they are Oromos. This we are going to connect with historical development in that country. So as I usually do, let me try to give some introduction about this program. According to many historians and observers, the Ethiopian people in general, the Oromo in particular, has been living under some kind of military dictatorship, even if it has officially not known. The military under Haile Selassie, Meles Zenawi, and Abiy Ahmed are loyal to the regime, not to the law of the country, at any time and place without the court order. The security forces and the police can arrest people, kidnap people, and kill the citizen. And many well-known Oromo leaders since the time of colonization disappeared, killed in prison, or we don't know where they are. So the members and the leaders of all political political oppositions, the Oromo nationalists, they are killed or put in prison in many, many different times. The leaders of the Oromo Liberation Front, which were in exile, came back to the country in 2018, and they were promised to run their politics peacefully at home, but most of them, they are now sitting in prison, as you saw here in our picture. Over 50,000 Oromo political prisoners are in the Ethiopian prison at the current time. So, uh, so that's why we call it Ethiopia is the prison of all the Oromos and Oromo political prisoners, and then we have to know the cause or the root of this problem, how it can happen in 21st century that the same culture, the same politics is applying, even if the rulers are changing from time to time, they are apply the same thing. And I didn't mention the military junta, which was ruled that country since 1974 to 91, called by the leader of the junta was called Mengistu Haile Mariam. He killed the people like what we call it, the fly, and many people died, lost their life. And the same thing is always happening, but in different forms. So this is what we are going to discuss today. Now I'm directly going to my question. Thank you. You are my guest, Danabo. My first question is, if you look back from the historical experience of Ethiopia, how can you explain the role of military in the history of different dictators? The different dictators of that empire. We call it dictators because there was no opposition party, there was no democratic elected group. Thus, dictators rely all the time on the military. How can you explain this? Why this is happening? Wanike Furakas.
Muted. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah,
unmute.
thank you. Yeah, thank you for the brief introduction. I think, when we see the atrocities Ethiopia is perpetrating against the Oromo, I mean, we're talking about arbitrary mass arrest, arbitrary killings, eviction of hundreds of thousands of people. This is not the first time. Like you mentioned earlier, this is a continuation of regime after regime after regime. When Ethiopia invaded Oromia, more than half the population of Oromo were killed, and that was followed by the Haile Selassie's regime, whereby people were evicted from their land, arbitrarily arrested, Oromo identities were criminalized, Oromo values and culture were banned. The atrocities were indescribable. And that was followed again by the communist regime. The same thing happened. And in the past 3 decades, even under the camouflage of federalism, it is the same atrocities that are taking place at the moment. And I was reading various reports, and if you look at report by Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and all kinds of credible international institutions on Ethiopia, what you find is the arbitrary killings, arbitrary mass arrest, arbitrary eviction, and to the extent of using hunger as weapon. That's what characterizes Ethiopia. So from this, and given the historical context in which Ethiopia came into being, I can boldly say the problem is not just the regimes. The problem is not the authoritarian dictators, not just the government. Ethiopia itself is a problem. I say Ethiopia itself is a problem. It is a leftover of the European colonial system. As we all know, Ethiopia was conceived by the same violence, by genocide, and has been maintained by the same violence and genocide. There's nothing new. It emerged, as we all know, out of the process of the scramble for Africa by assisting the Europeans. They split up Africa among themselves. And that was the period when Ethiopia invaded countries, nations in the current day Ethiopia. I'm talking about the Oromo, Walaita, Kafa, Sidama, and the rest of it. All these nations were invaded and incorporated into the territory of Ethiopia during the period of the scramble for Africa. So there are frictions now. On one hand, these countries, these nations, such as the Oromo, the Walaita, the Gambela, Ogaden, and the rest of it, they want to exercise their rights, their freedom, the right to self-governance. Now, when we talk about democracy, human rights, the rule of law, we have to understand that these are multiple layers when it comes to Ethiopia. It's unique. It's different to the rest of the world because Ethiopia is not a country. It is an amalgamation of different countries that were invaded in the 19th century and incorporated into Ethiopia. So the reason why the regimes after regimes are known for stifling the nations in Ethiopia is because they want to maintain this criminal entity called Ethiopia. So there are two forces friction. On one hand, the nations in Empire Ethiopia, they want to exercise their basic human rights, which includes the right to self-govern, the right to self-determination, the right to development, the right to have access to various infrastructure. On the other hand, because if these rights are materialized, then the true picture of Ethiopia will come into being. That is why all regimes are known for stifling the Oromo and the others. So Oromos is very peculiar in the sense that Oromo have been demanding their rights for ages. Now that led to, because Ethiopia's, there is no element of peaceful talk or peaceful handling of matters in the DNA of Ethiopia. That is why earlier you mentioned in 2018, after the bloodshed of the Oromo youth, there was a regime change in Ethiopia. So what they did was they tried to pose or pretend that they wanted to peacefully resolve the disagreement with the Oromo Liberation Front. That is why the leaders of the Oromo Liberation Front trusted the government of Ethiopia and they moved in. No sooner they arrived in the capital, Finfinne, a few months later, all of them were arrested, including, by the way, the leader, okay, who has been put under house arrest. Now, ever since then, since 2018, I don't know if you have seen the most recent report by Human Rights Watch, who describes how the leaders of the Oromo Liberation Front who bought into the idea of peaceful way of engaging with the Ethiopian government ended up in prison, and they have been languishing in prisons. You mentioned, you gave figure, over 15,000 Oromo people are languishing in prison, including the leaders of the Oromo Liberation Army. I mean, the Oromo Liberation Front. So, without doing anything wrong, and many of them, particularly the leaders, the court ruled out they should be released, and they shouldn't have been arrested in the first place. But because the government is above the law, they have continued to keep them behind the bar. So it's illegal detention. So this is reflective of the true image of why is Ethiopia doing this? They've declared it, didn't they? They have told the world that they want to. Abiy Ahmed said the Ethiopian government is determined, word by word, to eliminate the OLF. And on the other hand, in the parliament, the spokesperson of the ruling party, PP, said, when asked about the Oromo Liberation Army, why is it that the Ethiopian government has not been able to contain the Oromo Liberation Army? In response to that, he said, well, we couldn't contain the Oromo Liberation Army because the Oromo Liberation Army are operating within the Oromo. And the only way we can get rid of the Oromo Liberation Army is by getting rid of the Oromo. That's the word he used. The only way you can get rid of the fish is by drying up the sea. By drying up the sea. So daily reports by international institutions, globally accepted human rights organizations. When you see these reports, it is part of the strategy of drying up the sea. They are, every day we receive report of, in this village in Oromia, tens of people were arbitrarily killed. Some of them are buried alive. Villages are burned to the ground. And so this is part of implementing, wiping out the Oromo, as they said, word by word, in order to contain the Oromo Liberation Front. So this is massive in its scale. And it is day-to-day report that we are receiving. Children are targeted, elderly people are targeted, artists are targeted. We recently have received news of the assassination of artists by the name of Sori, the likes of Hachalu. And if you just add up, it's the same Ethiopia that killed the likes of Ebisa Adunya decades ago, killed Hachalu Hundessa. And
we are coming to all these artists, artist Oromos. So okay.
All I'm saying is, it is part. It's not an isolated incident. It fits into Ethiopia's strategy, as they said, of drying up the sea. They are determined to get rid of the Oromo in order to force opposition to surrender. That is how Ethiopia was born, and that is how Ethiopia has been maintained.
Yeah. One is your microphone is muted now. I don't know why. So let's unmute your. Yes. Okay. I'm going. As you said, there are a lot of factors which this country used against the population of this country, and which led the country into more catastrophic way of life. For example, you mentioned the hunger catastrophe, which is repeatedly coming as what we call it in the West, the economic recession, economy goes up and then it goes down. And during the recession, many people lost their work. The situation in general is so bad. But the worst thing in Ethiopia is the hunger. The hunger is always coming and killing millions. It did in Wallo, as we remember, during the Haile Selassie time, and in Tigray, Wallo, even during the dark time, it killed millions of people, even in the south, in Bale, in RC, where it's a lot of resources are there, and even now, the Borana areas are affected by this. The main reason for this is the use of huge resources for the military purpose to keep all these, consecutive Ethiopian leaders on power. What they rely to survive is not on the democratic right of people, but on a clique of military generals. And these military generals are not, abide by the rules and the laws of that country. Uh, they are abide by the ruler, which comes if they are during the Haile Selassie. Some generals, they say that Takla Ashkar, the Ashkar is I don't know how to explain it, slave. And during the Derg time, they are friends, to each other. They killed the people like, Efla, as I said. And Mengistu directly, he took his pistol and directly shot at the generals, which didn't, fulfill their duty. During the past TPLF, or called EPDRF, they use the military power. The military in general is against the Oromo nationalists, the Oromo political leaders. Many Oromos the well-known Oromo political leaders like Neti Gammada, like this great man in Borana area. He was, a philosopher, author, very, very, very important for these people
It's
was
called Dabbasaguyo.
Abbasaguyo, yes. So, and let us try to explain this phenomenon. Why these people, we are going to why these people cannot learn from all this historical, consecutive military dictatorship in this country. Let us come to the next point. For example, do you have any other evidence or other way that the all power holders without military power could keep their power in that country? Can you for example, find any time in the history of that country, or even until today, without uh, military suppression of the people?
Yeah, I mean, again, it takes us back to what we initially said. There is no way of, at least so far, Ethiopia has not been an entity where people get things done peacefully. We have seen lots of regime change. Every regime change was conducted by military engagement. Now, it is a kind of turning point because one dictator is toppled down and then replaced by another dictator. Mengistu got toppled down, and who took his part? EPRDF dictators. EPRDF dictators toppled down, and now the PP dictators have taken power. And the reason why it cannot be transformed is because of the integral constituency of Ethiopia itself. Now, Ethiopia, nations and countries in Empire Ethiopia, they were brought and merged together by force. At no point they gave consent for them to be incorporated into Ethiopia. And by the way, the crimes that Ethiopia is perpetrating against the Oromo, Walaita, and all other nations should be considered as a crime against all countries in the world, because it violates every international law, every international human rights law. And because Ethiopia was built by violence, in order for Ethiopia to continue, the only way they are determined to preserve Ethiopia is by violence. So that is why, it's a good example is the Oromo Liberation Front were determined to peacefully resolve the problem. But what happened to the leaders of the Oromo Liberation Front? They all were, taken to prison, and they ended up in prison where they are still languishing. And had it not been for the fact that the Oromo Liberation Army was determined, things would have been catastrophic. The Oromo Liberation Army are fighting. These are, by the way, the university graduates, people who were peacefully protesting pre-2018, believing that by peaceful means of struggle, problems could be solved. But Ethiopia is not prepared to engage in peaceful ways. That is why the Oromo youth were forced to take up gun, because that's the only language Ethiopia could understand. So it's always the dictators who decide what kind of mechanism people should use. If the dictators are violent, then the people, the governed, have no other option but to respond forcefully. That is the reason why there are fightings in Oromia and in other parts of Ethiopia. By the way, the fighting in Oromia has been overshadowed by the others who have got access to media and by the Western problems. There is this research conducted by Peace Research Institute Oslo, and they investigated in 2022 armed conflicts at global level. And in 2022 alone, there are more people killed in the battle than any other time since 1984. That's at global level. And more than half of these killings were conducted by Ethiopia. So the war in Oromia in 2022 is one of the 7 biggest wars or conflicts at global level. So it is at that level. Just because we haven't got the access to media, the Oromo are too polite, we don't talk about it. But incredible international institutions are exposing the scale of the atrocity, the scale of the problem is one of the highest, the biggest at global level. So that is one. And the other thing you mentioned earlier is Ethiopia is using not only drones or tanks or um, machine guns. Ethiopia is also using propaganda to obfuscate, to cover up the atrocities. They use all kinds of weapon. When I say weapon, not just rifles. They're using, for example, hunger, famine as weapon. In Oromia, in many parts of Oromia, particularly in areas known for surplus production, such as the Walega area, the area known for surplus production, such as RC Valley area, farmers have not been able to till their lands, because if they are captured doing their land, tilling their land, they will be beaten up or might even be killed. They will be accused of, oh, you are supporting the Oromo Liberation Army. They burn down their crops. They are denied access to agricultural inputs. They are denied access to fertilizers, better seeds. So now what is simmering is, because the farmers have not been able to plant their crops, then in the subsequent years, there'll be famine. And Ethiopia is deliberately doing this. The drought, you've mentioned the drought in not just in Borona, in many parts of Oromia. They denied the humanitarian organizations to even make interventions in Borona.
Yeah.
Why? Because if these people survive the famine, they think every Oromo appears to be a threat to the government of Ethiopia. That is what, and the only way you can prove to the government of Ethiopia as an Oromo that you're not a threat is only if you subscribe or sign up for the membership of the ruling party. If you are not a member of the ruling party, and if you are an Oromo, then you are a threat. We have seen what they're doing to farmers, who demanded, okay, I've paid my tax and I want to return my receipt. They, in a very indignant way, they are mistreated. Elderly people beaten up like criminals. So the other thing that Ethiopia is using to attack the Oromo is by using some Oromo-speaking sellouts. They want to say, oh, this is a conflict between. They want to say this is a civil war. It is the leaders of the government of Ethiopia are Oromo, and the Oromo Liberation Front are also Oromo. So this is a conflict between two brothers. This is the kind of narrative they want to advance by using some sellouts, whom I call George Orwell's hornless cows. They want to pretend to make it appear or make it look like this is a regional issue. It's not. The problem is not between Ethiopia and Oromo. It's a problem between the government and between the regime and the people being governed. So the problem is not the regime. That is what I want to underline. The problem is not the government. It's not just the government. It's not this regime. The problem is the way Ethiopia itself was structured. That's the problem. If the problem was the regime, things could have changed when Haile Selassie's regime was toppled down. But it's only gone worse when the communist regime came. And the EPRDF regime came in. They ruled for nearly 27 years. The same thing happened. Now, this regime, whose people in the palace speak Afan Oromo, they are even more determined to get rid of the Oromo. I mean, the Oromo are the only nations in 2023 against whom there is declared intention of genocide, and genocide is being implemented. When they declared that, the only way we can get rid of the fish is by drying up the sea in relation to the Oromo Liberation Army and the Oromo people. What they effectively said is, we have to get rid of the Oromo in order to get rid of the Oromo Liberation Army. So that is what they have been doing again and again. And they use everything they could get their hands on. That's how
Yeah.
I assess it, Mr. Ayala.
Thank you really very much. You mentioned several interesting factors which which explains actually what you say. The problem is not only the region, but how that country is structured. This is really the main uh, interesting point in our today's discussion. What we said is the country is structured uh, on the military base. The power or the group or the a group of people or ethnic group which has military power in his hand is the one which control this country. Haile Selassie and his coup ministers, or what you call it, feudal administrations called or controlled this country for almost 40 years. The population that country was not very, very, very much as it was today, and the peoples, they lived under this oppression for almost 47 years by paying taxes. And then they of course it's a different, very different from one place to another place. In some place just you pay tax, some place you pay three-fourths of your product to the feudal leaders. And then this the next generation, what you call it, Derg, they came to power. Just they grab and invest all the resources on the war against the Oromo Liberation Army, against the Eritreans, against the Tigrans. Millions of people, they perished in this country because of this, the war against different nationalities. And then the Woyane regime came. Of course, they did war again against the Eritrean border conflict. And then they fought in the Oromia all the time. What we want to explain is here is the militarization of that country. The power holder, which has a military in its hand, is controlling the resource, it's controlling the people, it kills the people as it like. There is no law, there is no rules. And this is what we have to, our listeners must understand. And so what you said is not Abi or Oromo speaking, or Amharic speaking people's that stay in power explains the issue, but the structure which this country was found on is very big problem. And my next question will be, I'm going to, what is the role of, now, and now we are coming to, what is the role of law and the court system if the rulers of that country is not respecting the, what they said, we are going to implement rules and the laws and the killing the people. If you get my question, I don't know.
Yeah, I got your point. that's why I said earlier, the crimes that Ethiopia has committed against the Oromo, or the atrocities that Ethiopia has perpetrated against the Oromo, should be considered as a crime perpetrated against every country in the world. It is, I see it in two ways. Ethiopia has violated its own constitution. The current government, as it was the previous government, let's only focus on the current government. The government of Abiy Ahmed has violated every article of the federal constitution. I'll come to that. And it has also violated all the international human rights laws that, or norms and instruments that Ethiopia is signatory of. If you take Ethiopia's constitution, like, for example, Article 39 of the constitution guarantees the right to self-determination, and it is an unconditional right. Okay, if Ethiopia was prepared to respect that constitution, they would not be fighting between the Oromo Liberation Army and Ethiopia. Things could have been brought to the table, referendum should have been conducted, and the Oromo people should be given the chance to decide whether they allow this beast called Ethiopia to continue to prevail in Oromo, or whether they want to restore Oromia's sovereign independence. But Ethiopia is not prepared for that. So in so doing, Ethiopia is violating its own constitution, one. And when one law is violated, it leads to violation of others. You know, three things are inseparable: peace, development, and human rights. If you violate peace, then you are violating development. If you are violating this, you are violating human rights. So Ethiopia has, you know, outrightly violated its own constitution, every part of the constitution: the right to be alive, the right to self-determination, democratic rights, social rights, political rights. Every rights have been violated. And not only that, they have declared and been implementing genocide against the Oromo, which is crime in any standard. So that is why I said Ethiopia is not only violating its own constitution, it is violating the law or the norm that brings the global community together. So these violations, in fact, the target at the receiving end of Ethiopia's violent atrocities are the Oromo. But these crimes are not just perpetrated against the Oromo. It is a crime perpetrated against all international community, all countries around the globe that are signatories to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and all the legal, international legal norms and frameworks. That's in short how I see it. You know, we mentioned the report by Peace Research Institute Oslo. You know, was extensive report, and they say more than half of the people who were killed in the battle in 2022 were Ethiopians. The conflict between the Oromo Liberation Army and the Ethiopian army is rated as one of the worst um, battle conflicts ever recorded.
Yeah.
So what that does that mean? I mean, of course, uh, the international media are not giving attention to this for many reasons. We might not have time
I
to.
think this is actually. Can you please uh, develop this? Why the international media is not so quiet, even though there is war, full-scale war in Oromia for the last almost, let us call from 2018 until 5 years and plus. Let us leave alone what was happened before. Why? When even there is report now that they can rely on this human rights report and they try to take up. Why they are silent? Really, this is very interesting. Can you really say something about this?
I would rather say, they're silent because one, how many Oromo media platforms are reporting about this in um, global languages? Um, we the Oromo, we only speak to the Oromo in Oromo language, or maximum it's Amharic language. I think I blame ourselves for that. We have not been putting it to the world out there um, to the required extent. I'm not undermining the efforts that have been made, but one factor is that. Second, um, the hypocrisy of the Western world. Um, it's a moral bankruptcy of these big media institutions. They are only running after their own interest rather than focusing on promoting the values of democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. Let me give you one example.
Mm.
If you take the BBC or the Al Jazeera and the rest of them, they cover 24/7 about, say one Russian spy, if one Russian spy defects to the West, they cover
Yeah.
that news for 24/7. But the fact that hundreds of thousands of Oromo have been killed has not attracted their attention, because at the end of the day, it's a politics. They're driven by their own agenda. And the other thing is, I think the global community, by turning deaf ear to the genocide that has been declared and has been implemented against the Oromo, by turning deaf ear against this and turning blind eyes, I can boldly say the global community are risking moral bankruptcy. They would say, oh, we failed to act, but that would be too late. The global community let the Rwanda down. Rwanda thing only became an issue after all the genocide were conducted. The same thing is going to happen. And the other factor, the other reason is that the international community, particularly the Western countries, are buying into the deceptive propaganda of Abiy Ahmed. Abiy Ahmed says, "Oh, I'm a person who is achieving this and that," rather than evaluating the government of Abiy Ahmed by its action. Um, Many of the Western world are evaluating by what he says. That's how he received Nobel Peace Prize. And recently, in the international platform, when you say He's talking about record-breaking green legacy, which has never been recorded by the Guinness Book of the World anyway. So they are trying to cover it up, and there could be many, many, many other factors. But who I blame? I blame ourselves. We have not been doing enough to bring these atrocities to the light, to bring it to the attention of international community.
Yeah. Thank you very much. This is, sorry, while you are explaining this thing, I'm listening, but I'm trying to find a word into English. Uh, you know, you raise up this very interesting thing. Okay, yes, we, you don't, it's in general to blame others for your own, problem. Others is not initially not good. But why we blame sometimes on them? Because this empire, this what we call it, the fake empire, was is agent colonialism, because we have a data which show, or the support they made since uh, the time of the scramble for Africa, the support they gave to this, minority group, which occupied the rest of this country, and they killed, among other, the Oromo people. About half of the Oromo population died. There are some small nationalities in Kafa, which they destroyed to 95%, and they killed a lot of people. And this was not, even the researchers internationally, they didn't want to study this and record it, because, what we call it, what we sometimes suspect, that because of that, this country is an agent colonialism. Still, we are indirectly colonized by this, who supplied army. Once you raise up very interesting thing. If the West media, they try to report what is going on between, different small things. For example, the war between Ukraine and Russia throughout 24 hours. But uh, why they don't care about the suffering of the Oromo, the war which, uh, went for almost 5+ years. Let us leave alone what was happened. Once I asked some journalists here. There were three journalists, two ladies and one, or two, no, two ladies and two men. They were on the way to their conference, and then, I just got an opportunity and asked them, "You guys, you are journalists. Uh, why you don't report, for example, what is happening in Ethiopia? Because during when Wayne was on power, they killed Keros everywhere. The young people." And there is a hell of information, a lot of information to report, but no one was, took it up. They were very quiet. And then, one of the journalists replied me by saying that we are always interested in regional problems, she said. I said, no, no, I'm not buying this argument. Then why? She said, because I said, I looked for this translation in English. In Sweden or Norway, they call it Lego Soldat, which means mercenary soldier. That time, there was one mercenary soldier, Norwegian by nationality, in Congo. He was captured. He was there as mercenary soldier, but captured, and was judged to death. And the whole West media was reporting this. very, very intensively. And then I said, if you say like this, then the life of the Oromos, you don't care. You compare with these, mercenary soldiers. You are not really giving value to this Oromo's life. And then one of the journalists, she replied. Then she said, "This guy is genuinely saying he is right. Actually, we should consider it," she said. And I was really satisfied. And then, I said, "Thank you for listening." So this is, actually, this is the what you call it, the world politics is one of the main hindrance for the Suffer people like the Oromo people, because they don't care about what is going on there. They care about their own economic interest, their geopolitical interest. So what we have to do is we should not expect that much. We have to, as you said, work very hard in order to explain to the people who can understand. The majority of the people, they don't care. They live their life here. But that is the politician, the media, which is quiet. So, sorry, I want to explain this. This is very interesting for our discussion. And so let me go a little bit further, about maybe 5 minutes. I have a lot of questions which remain, but let me go to the part of my question. Please, let's take up some of the by name some of the Oromo leaders or the OLF leaders who are sitting in the prison at this time, and explain what is their crime. In short, you can answer this one. You know them. I tried to put here, but there is. There, but I can't. When I don't know what is technically happened. So please, the desk is yours.
I, I don't. They even by the standard of Ethiopia's legal system, the court has ruled that they should be released. They should be freed. So they are kept incommunicado. It is against the ruling of the court that the Abiy Ahmed, the soldiers of Abiy Ahmed, have kept them illegally. As simple as that. This only shows that the rule of law doesn't exist in Empire Ethiopia. The military is above the law. Abiy Ahmed is above the law. If tiny bit rule of law existed, these people shouldn't have been in prison. They shouldn't have been arrested in the first place. The likes of Abdi Ragasa, Lami Benya, and the list would go on and on. And in fact, there are tens of thousands of innocent Oromo civilians languishing in various prisons. And the only crime they have committed is being Oromo.
Yeah.
They were born to Oromo identity. Apart from that, that's why I'm saying this is an insult to the international community. It's an insult to the African Union when these kinds of happen. It's an insult to the global community to arbitrarily mass kill people, to deny basic human rights. Like we mentioned earlier, every day, on daily basis, we've been receiving reports of assassination of innocent civilians. So there is no, I don't know, I can't explain this um, any more than this. It's just, on one hand, it shows the potential moral bankruptcy of the international community. And on the other hand, it also shows that one way or another, the Oromo have to survive. And the only way the Oromo can survive, particularly when the international community are turning deaf ear and blind eyes, is by standing up against these atrocities. That's all I could say.
Yeah. Actually, now we are going to finish this program, and thank you for you uh, came to this program today, and we tried to explain or show that what is the nature of military dictatorship of the consecutive Ethiopian regimes, and what they did, how all the times the all leaders relied on the military power in order to suppress, in order to especially stay on power, killing thousands of people, thousands of political oppositions, especially on the Oromo people, on the Oromo leadership, because this we can start from history. Since during the Haile Selassie time, they start to assassinate Mamu Mazemir, Haile Mariam Gammada, and then General Tadesse Birru. Later on, even they kidnapped from the border country like Kenya, like Tasfaun Chamada, and the leader of the Oromo Liberation Front, a very huge person like, as I said, Igamada, and thousands of known and unknown Oromo leaders, they disappeared and killed. And that's why the Oromos, the Oromos are fighting against this very brutal colonial power in order to get their independence through self-determination. So the only way Oromo's voice is going to be heard, they must come up by themselves, use the media to explain all these difficulties and all these problems in the 21st century, where the majority of these countries' populations are Oromo, but they are still suffering, as maybe in the very, 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 very old times. And by even day by day, the Oromo artists are the known Oromo artists, which are trying to explain their frustration through their song. They are being killed, and we have a lot of lists of this artists like Hachal Undesa. Now, very young guy yesterday was killed, and the Oromos, they are always crying and leaving and then forgetting this thing, but the Oromos must try to work together by themselves and try to stop this by liberating their country, liberating their people. This is what we are going to say. If you have final words, Danabo, so add on it, and then we are going to finish our program.
No, I haven't got anything to add. I think given what is happening, and particularly when you look at reports by international community and international organizations such as the Human Rights Watch and the report I mentioned earlier, Peace Research Institute, also Oslo, as well as the Amnesty International. Now, the scale of the genocide that Ethiopia is perpetrating against the Oromo requires the intervention of the global community. and the global community have to act. I'm talking whereby global community, I'm talking about the global institutions such as the United Nations, the Security Council, and similar organizations. I don't expect much from the African Union. Is the most disgraceful organization, because all these crimes are, committed right in front of the African Union. The seat of African Union is in Finfinne, and Finfinne is one of the Oromo cities where the Ethiopian soldiers are arbitrarily killing the Oromo. So it is shame the African Union are not doing anything, as always. And for the Oromo, I think at the end of the day, we are the ones at the receiving end of Ethiopia's brutality, and
Yeah.
we have to continue to intensify our engagement in all forms, in every aspect. That is what I wanted to say in general. And we need to continue to have these kinds of conversations in various languages
Yes.
to get the voice, the plight of the Oromo people to the global platforms. That's all I could say for now. And thank you, Ayana.
Thank you too. Thank you very much. Actually, we are going to have it, and we are going to work. We have to work very hard in order to save our people from this very cruel system, and the peoples must work together. And thank you very much, and see you again.
Thank you. See you.